Hello, everyone. Welcome to Joe the Lawyer. Like the rest of you, I have been cooped up in my house for the past couple of weeks on coronavirus quarantine. And also, like the rest of you, I've been watching Netflix. And I think, like most of you, we watched the Tiger King documentary, a documentary that is tragic, sad, interesting, hilarious, all at the same time. A little bit of everything, a whole bunch of emotions go through you when you watch that show. But one thing I know for sure is it gripped my imagination just as it has gripped the imagination of millions of people all over the world and especially all over the country. So I'm a lawyer, Joe the Lawyer. This is my show, Joe the Lawyer, where I talk about legal topics in the news, in popular culture, and then and also analyze the law that I think my viewers will find interesting. Today, I want to talk about one of the enduring mysteries from the Tiger King documentary series and in real life, and that is what happened to Carol Baskin's husband, Jack Don Lewis. Now, if you watch the show, Joe Exotic made sure that we heard many times, Joe Exotic, the Tiger King, many times, that he believed that Carol Baskin had murdered or somehow made Don Lewis disappear. Then we also heard from the detectives and the sheriffs in the show that it was an unsolved crime and that they didn't have enough evidence to go forward. And one of the things that they said was that there was no body and there was no crime. That is a common trope and belief in popular culture and amongst many people. No body, no crime. Well, there's actually a legal term for that. It's called Corpus Delicti. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through this article because there's some new developments in the case of Jack Don Lewis, and then I'm going to apply the Corpus Delicti rule to it and give you a little bit of opinion from there. So you see this article, Florida Sheriff Seeking Tips in Tiger King Mystery, all right? And this was published on April 1st, 2020, True Crime Daily, which is a really good website. And here's this ad. Only you can help solve the Jack Don Lewis cold case. Last seen 8/18/1997. Mr. Lewis was born April 30th, 1938. Hillsborough County Sheriff. Here is the phone number. A Florida sheriff asking the public for tips regarding one of the lingering mysteries raised in the recently released Netflix documentary Tiger King: Murder, Mayhem, and Madness. What happened to Carol Baskin's husband? Carol Baskin is the owner of Big Cat Rescue in Tampa, Florida. Tiger King, the documentary, is about Joseph Maldonado Passage, also known as Joe Exotic. I'm just going to call him Joe Exotic from here on, okay? The article keeps calling him Maldonado Passage. A former Oklahoma zookeeper who loves guns, younger men, and big cats. And friends, if you haven't watched this documentary, watch it. I mean, it's wild. It's a little bit disturbing, but it's extremely interesting. Earlier this year, Joe Exotic was sentenced to 22 years in prison for his role in a murder for hire plot. He was convicted of trying to hire someone to kill Baskin, who had tried to shut him down, accusing the Oklahoma Zoo of abusing animals and selling big cat cubs. In retaliation, Joe Exotic raised questions about Baskin's former husband, Jack Don Lewis, who disappeared in 1997. His often violent and expletive-filled rants about Baskin were not only broadcast on his web TV show, but also in the documentary. Since the show was released, speculation about Baskin and Lewis has run rampant, and Hillsborough County Sheriff Chad Chronister wants to take advantage of all this attention. And that's fairly normal because once something like this gets out into the public, new knowledge, new people may emerge that will come forward to law enforcement that wouldn't have come forward in the past. So the sheriff's trying to take advantage of it. It's smart. The documentary extensively covered Joe Exotic's repeated accusations that Baskin killed her husband and possibly fed him to her tigers. Baskin has never been charged with a crime and released a statement refuting the accusations made in the series. Chronister said at least 6 new leads a day about Lewis have come in over the past week. I imagine a lot of those are not good leads, but that's a lot of leads, so this could lead to something. It'll be interesting. Probably not, but you never know, right? The sheriff debunked a few allegations raised by Joe Exotic in the documentary, including that Lewis is buried under the Big Cat Rescue septic tank, wasn't put in until years after Lewis' disappearance, and that Lewis's body was put through the meat grinders used to process food for the tigers. Those were removed several weeks before his disappearance, Chronister said. Last week, Joe Exotic filed a lawsuit seeking nearly $100 million in damages, $94 million, claiming, among other things, he was convicted based on false and perjured testimony. He also requested a pardon from President Trump. I knew he was going to request one from Donald Trump, okay? Donald Trump has pardoned a lot of people, a lot of famous celebrities. My opinion on that is that Joe Exotic is not going to get a pardon from Donald Trump. Number one, he was convicted of attempted homicide. Nobody that Trump pardoned was convicted of of a violent crime to that degree. Even though he didn't execute it, it's attempted. Second, because of the publicity for this show, I think it actually hurts his chances. And I don't think Donald Trump wants to be the guy who pardoned someone who was convicted of mishandling and, I believe, abusing animals. So I don't think it's going to come for Joe Exotic, even though it came for a lot of people. Few more comments. If you watch this documentary, the quotes about Don Lewis being under the Big Cat rescue septic tank. Okay, the documentary didn't clear this up like the sheriff did here. I think that's a little dishonest because they really left that open to people's minds. And the septic tank wasn't was they say it wasn't put in until years after Lewis's disappearance. So I think that's a little dishonest there of the documentary. Also, the documentary didn't say that the meat grinders were removed prior to Don Lewis's disappearance. The documentary insinuated that it would have been possible for Carol Baskin to put Don Lewis in the meat grinders, and it also would have been possible that he was under the septic tank. But the sheriff is saying here that just isn't the case. So you ask, the question here you're left with the show is, well, why haven't the police or deputies or sheriff's office done more to discover Don Lewis's disappearance? And the common thing is no crime, no body, no crime, no body, no crime. Now there is some legal value to that. So let's hop over to my favorite legal website, Wikipedia, okay? And let me just say here, I actually like Wikipedia a lot because it's easy to access and it usually gives you the information that you are looking for, okay? Don't rely on Wikipedia as a serious legal source, all right? And also don't rely on my show as a serious legal source. I'm here to discuss legal topics and give legal information. I'm not here to provide legal advice, okay? Big disclaimer, big disclaimer. Contact an attorney directly if you have a legal question. But this gives us insight into the what happened with Dawn. So, corpus delicti is a term from Western jurisprudence referring to the principle that a crime must be proved to have occurred before a person can be convicted of committing that crime. For example, a person cannot be tried for larceny unless it can be proven that property has been stolen. Likewise, in order for a person to be tried for arson, it must be proven that a criminal act resulted in the burning of a property. Black's Law Dictionary defines corpus delicti as the fact of a crime having been actually committed. In the American legal system, the concept has outgrowth in several principles. Many jurisdictions hold as a legal rule that a defendant's out-of-court confession alone is insufficient evidence to prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That small part right there basically means that if the police have accused someone of a crime, say robbery, and then that person gave a statement admitting to the robbery, well, the police need more than that statement alone to convict that person. They need more than that statement alone to convict that person. A statement alone of the defendant, of the accused, is not enough to convict someone. So that's an interesting rule, and it's a good rule because people could admit to things that they didn't necessarily do or that didn't actually happen. So you need some supporting evidence to show that it happened. But let's get back to this corpus delicti, body of the crime. I think we get the general idea there must be a body of a crime. And what most people think is that you must literally have a body in order to prove homicide. You must literally have a body. And corpus delicti used to have that sort of meaning. So this down here, this little part right here is very illuminating. Misinterpretation. The British serial killer John George High destroyed the bodies of his victims with acid, apparently because he thought that in the absence of a corpse, murder could not be proven because there was no corpus delicti. High had misinterpreted the Latin word corpus as a literal body rather than a figurative one. This had previously been the case under Lord Hale's rule of no body, no crime. So that used to be the law, but in the 20th century, the law expanded to allow prosecution for murder solely on circumstantial evidence. Okay, so how do we sort of cue or align these two principles that no body, no crime? However, we're not supposed to take that literally. And how does that work in the case of Jack Lewis? So Jack Lewis, who allegedly, at least according to Joe Exotic, was killed by Carol Baskin, and in the show you can see that there was a will that Jack Lewis had allegedly written, but it was actually written, I believe, by Carol. Okay, leaving everything to Carol. A couple months later, Jack disappears. There was language stating disappearance in the will itself. Okay, which leads you to believe that Carol may have had a role in Jack's death. But we keep hearing this, you hear no body, no crime, no body, no crime. And it was even insinuated in the documentary itself by the sheriffs. But after reading this rule, corpus delicti, okay, you can see the police don't need, and the prosecution don't need a literal body, okay, in order to prove a crime anymore. That used to be the case under Lord Hale's rule. If they have enough circumstantial evidence, they could show a crime and or they could prove even a homicide, okay? And if you scroll back here, here's an example. The presence at a missing person's home of spilled human blood identifiable as that person's in sufficient quantity to indicate exsanguination, which I believe that means that it came from that person's body, even in the absence of a corpse, that the possibility that no crime occurred and the missing person is merely missing is not reasonably credible. So that's just an example, but essentially what the law says is, we have in our minds that no body, no crime. That's not the case. If the police, law enforcement, prosecution have enough circumstantial evidence, they could still prove a murder. But let's be real here. It would be extremely difficult for the prosecution to prove a murder in the absence of a body. It's extremely difficult. They can bring the case in the absence of a dead body, but it is extremely difficult to prove a case in the absence of a dead body. And why is that? Well, I'm a defense attorney. I could always argue maybe that person's blood got there because they got into a fight, they got cut, they got punched in the face, okay? They slipped and fell. They can't prove that the person's actually dead, even with this circumstantial evidence. So essentially what the law says is that no body, no crime is not correct, okay? If there's enough circumstantial evidence, the prosecution can move forward with a case to show a murder. However, it is extremely difficult to do that. Therefore, you are almost never going to see it. I don't want to say never. It still happens. It can happen. And here, British serial killer John George High was prosecuted despite the absence of corpses. However, the Commonwealth, the state, the prosecution would need a ton of evidence to show a murder with the absence of a body, but they are allowed to attempt to do that. So let's take that back to the case of Jack Don Lewis. If you watch the documentary, you could see they didn't have, even like the evidence given in that example, the police, law enforcement didn't have a lot of circumstantial evidence to show that Jack Lewis was actually dead or had been murdered. There was evidence that Jack Lewis drove his car to an airport, okay? Certain items were left in the car. His disappearance was sort of abrupt, all right? But no blood, no DNA, no crime scene where he was allegedly killed. So what you have here in the case of Jack Lewis is you have no body, but you also have no supporting evidence otherwise, or very, very little. Therefore, there is no case to be brought, frankly, against anyone in the Jack Don Lewis cold case. However, it is not true, no body, no crime. If the police had a whole bunch of circumstantial evidence, they could then pursue a crime. Say, for instance, they did pull DNA off of a meat grinder. Then they also had a location where blood was found, a weapon with the blood, with fingerprints on it, etc., etc. You have to build a case step by step. If there was a whole bunch of evidence showing that Mr. Lewis had been killed in some way or manner, even in the absence of body, they could still bring the case. But, after watching that documentary, you can see the case is very, very sparse. There are other competing theories that Jack Don Lewis would have just disappeared, went down to Costa Rica. Therefore, the police, law enforcement doesn't feel they have enough to go forward with this case in confidence. So I hope you learned something here. There is a corpus delicti rule. And basically what that means is you need enough evidence to show that the crime really occurred. And that's on a case-by-case basis. But it doesn't mean no body, no crime, literally. However, like in the case of Jack Lewis, the prosecution is going to need a lot of evidence to show that a murder occurred in the absence of a body. So usually law enforcement wants a body. And in the Jack Lewis case, there just is not enough evidence to go forward. However, as this article said, we have this sheriff is getting 6 calls a day. 6 calls a day, so maybe something will emerge in the Don Lewis case. I tend to think that the theory put forward by the show that he was pushed out of an airplane over the Gulf, well, that would prevent a body, and that would also prevent any evidence of a murder one way or another, right? Nobody's going to get that body. So that's an interesting theory and may explain what actually happened. So I hope you enjoyed this perspective from Joe Pometto, Joe the Lawyer. I'm a practicing Pittsburgh attorney. If you like my channel, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers right now. Please subscribe. Also, I have an email list. Sign up for my email list. All I'm going to do is send you free stuff, and when you sign up, you get a PDF on what to do when pulled over by the police. Thank you for watching, and tune in again.